Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm Christopher Cook, and I suppose my one and only qualification for talking about what I'm going to this evening and in a month's time is probably that I have had an abiding curiosity about the idea of stardom and fame and celebrity, I think since I was about 8 years old, and I discovered an extraordinary stack of photoplay magazines that some of you who are perhaps a little older than others will perhaps remember, in a loft in the house that my parents had recently bought. And they opened a kind of world to me that I'm afraid has probably been the real world to me for far too long. I do in fact teach cultural studies at the University of Syracuse, so I have at least a relevant academic bona fide. Anyway, can I begin by thanking you all for venturing out on a rather dank February night. I'm not sure that what I'm going to say will necessarily warm you through, but I hope it may be a source of some kind of enlightenment. I would, of course, wish to thank Gresham College too, who once again have allowed me to think extensively about a subject, as I've said, that seems to have preoccupied me so long, but also to nip and bite at all our cultural heels now with ever sharper teeth. And lastly, like any of us who teach, I owe a debt of gratitude to my students, at Syracuse particularly, who, with little encouragement, take me to celebrity websites that make me feel very old indeed sometimes, share gossip with me, and above all keep us all endlessly supplied with magazines that seem to cater for every kind of taste in celebrity. Of course, we all have views about celebrities, and indeed celebrities are everywhere. There are A-lists, and there are B-lists, and there are probably Z-lists too, where perhaps you'll find Gresham lecturers rubbing shoulders with men and women who once appeared on television when it was still a sooty black and white, and the image was still made up of 405 lines. As for that word celebrity, it has of course morphed into an adjective to be applied to anything that is jostling for a place and our attention in our ever busier cultural marketplace. There is now, of course, celebrity golf, there's celebrity cooking, and very probably celebrity sex, if you knew where to find it. Actually, celebrity sex is there in the popular newspapers, the red tops or the tabloids, but we're going to get to that later and next time I'm here. There's a noun too, celebrification, often shaken in our faces by prophets of cultural doom, who think, I suppose, that the world is going to hell in a handcart, pushed, doubtless, by Posh and Becks, J-Lo, George Michael, or Wayne Rooney, or whoever has recently made the front page of The Sun, The Mirror, or The Star this week. At the front page of a popular newspaper is perhaps not a bad place to start an inquiry into celebrity. This is the Daily Star for Monday, January the 31st, and who takes the lead? Jordan, also known as Katie Price, in a story which reads, I quote, "Glamour girl Kate Price was caught up in a 9/9 drama yesterday. Paramedics raced to the £3 million mansion where the model has been at war with her cage fighter husband Alex Reid over their bitter split." The photo, I think, is vintage paparazzo, with Price seemingly sticking her tongue out at the photographer, and across the chest that you might say launched 1,000 tabloid sheets and burnt the topless. Across her chest, an oval inset of an ambulance. On its side, look carefully, just one word in yellow capital letters, fast. The jokes, visual and verbal, are not exactly very demanding. It's a knowing conspiracy, I think, between the paper and its readers. And as we shall see, a regular feature of this kind of popular British journalism. What about the second story? Friends, the Star tells us, they're always unnamed friends, of course. Friends have warned the X Factor beauty not to take back her love-cheat ex-husband Ashley, even though the couple have already met, quote, to test their feelings. In the interest of accuracy, I should tell you that when you track this story inside the paper, the final paragraph of the story actually reads, I quote, "A spokesman for Cheryl Cole said last night, Cheryl did not meet Ashley last week. She did not speak to him either." Never mind if it's true or false, inaccurate or simply invented. Celebrity obviously sells papers. And this, of course, on a day when the news elsewhere was all about the Mubarak regime unravelling in Egypt. We tend to assume that the kind of celebrity that I've been discussing so far is only about a century old, that it was fathered and mothered by the rapid growth in mass media from about the 1890s, which accelerated at breakneck speed through most of the 20th century. The rise of a popular press, broadcasting, first radio and then television, the cinema and all the ancillary professions that came with those new media, advertising, public relations, professional representation and so on. In this history, the arrival of the World Wide Web and ever speedier access to the internet is simply the most recent development in a process with its roots in the late Victorian period, which was created for the millions of new consumers who had transformed the cities of the Western world into so many teeming metropolises. But we could argue, and I want to argue, that the idea of celebrity has far deeper roots in Western culture. That's certainly the view of Fred Ingalls, a distinguished cultural studies scholar. In A Short History of Celebrity, he writes, I quote, "My most pointed moral is that the business of renown and celebrity has been in the making for 2.5 centuries. It was not thought up by the hellhounds of publicity a mere decade ago." And Ingalls is surely right, though do notice the use of the word renown alongside celebrity. From the 17th to the 19th century, and maybe even farther back into the ancient world of Greek heroes and Roman emperors, it was fame, or renown if you will, that gave men, and precious few women, their place in the sun of public approval. And it was deeds that made you famous. No one was famous then for simply being famous, though of course it helped to be born into the upper echelons of society. More interesting from the perspective of this inquiry into contemporary celebrity is how fame or renown has been used in these earlier periods. This is one of the greatest, I think, of all English royal portraits. It's Charles I, painted by Van Dyck and executed sometime in the early 1630s, not long after the Flemish artist had been appointed painter to the king. Charles had been on the throne for some 8 years, and he was already attempting to rule without Parliament, which he'd prorogued in 1629. This is the so-called period of personal rule. Van Dyck's portrait is perhaps a visual enactment of the king's then political ambitions. Certainly it's a very carefully staged, managed example of image building, and the first act, I think, in the theatre of power. Here is a heroic portrait of the Baroque ruler in all his glory, the very image of the divine right of kings. His Majesty's horse, with its left leg poised, seems ready to break into a canter, while an equerry carries his royal master's helmet to the right of the picture, ready for battle. In reality, though Charles was brave, we know that from what happened in February 1649 as he stepped out onto the balcony at the banqueting hall in Whitehall. Though he was clearly brave, he was anything but a hero. He was also nervous, stubborn, a man who was always less robust than his older brother, who had perhaps died of typhus, making his sibling an unwilling heir to the throne. Charles was also a very small man. Here, Van Dyck transforms him into a kind of supersized demigod on his horse. He's a warrior in armour riding out to war. This is simple, though magnificent propaganda for the Stuart ideal of kingship. An image for public consumption, to be admired, envied perhaps, and even feared. And in this sense, not so very different, perhaps, in its intentions as those images in celebrity magazines, say Hello or OK. Of course, what these magazines promise their readers is something that isn't here in this portrait of Charles I. The supposed reality behind the image. Wayne and Colleen in happier times, it has to be said, at home, relaxing. The private as well as the public face of celebrity. But that too has a historical precedent in the 17th century. Not in England, but across the Channel at the court of Louis XIV. This formal portrait of Louis exudes power, and its political intention is not so very different from the equestrian portrait of Charles I that we've just been looking at. Notice how Louis's crown on its cushion and the sceptre in his right hand, emblems of kingship, seem to play a very second fiddle to the monarch himself, wrapped in that mighty blue robe of state embroidered with the fleur-de-lis of France. Notice too how, despite its massive hilt, his sword of state seems to disappear into the ermine lining of the robe. The picture seems to say, "La France, c'est moi." Louis has quite literally clothed himself in the nation. But what the nation, or rather the court surrounding Louis that stood for the nation, what they wanted or needed or were given was access to the private as well as the public life of the monarch. So at Versailles, the Sun King's private life was enacted in public, and the most privileged amongst his courtiers were a part of these daily rituals, which were the same day in and day out. You could set your clock by them. Indeed, the great diarist of Versailles, the Duc de Saint-Simon, wrote of Louis XIV, "With an almanac and a watch, you could be 300 leagues from here at Versailles and still know exactly what His Majesty was doing." Take the King's rising each morning. What for most of us, thankfully, is a private moment was transformed into a public spectacle as the King's levee. After a valet had announced that it was time to rise, the King's doctors, members of his family, and a few of his more fortunate courtiers entered the bedchamber and watched as His Majesty was washed, as his hair was combed, and every other day he was shaven. Then the officers of the chamber and the wardrobe arrived for the full levee. The King was dressed and took a simple breakfast of broth. After the broth came the men who made the kingdom tick. It is estimated that the usual number of people attending numbered 100. They were all male. It would, of course, be a little facile to relate Louis XIV's levee at Versailles each morning to the intimate domestic shots of celebrities that are, of course, the principal reason for buying and reading magazines like Glamour, Hello, or OK. Louis's private life, made public, was bound up with the exercise of power, political power. To see the King, to be close to the King, to know the King, was there, kept his aristocracy at Versailles, and not at home on their estates in the country where they might have been tempted to make political trouble. The French state was centralized in order that the King and his ministers, though principally, of course, the King, might maintain absolute control. Nevertheless, the privilege of knowing what happens in the private life of the public figure, the belief that somehow the private is more real than the public, is inscribed across all our ideas about celebrity. Never mind Cheryl Cole here, wearing her heart on this cover of Hello magazine from 2009. Look below at Leslie Ash and, I quote, "the amazing at-home world exclusive" at the bottom of the cover. Private life made public. But what of Prince William up at the top, showing his heart? The heart as the guide to all that is true and noble. This perhaps takes us to the next milepost in our brief historical journey to contemporary celebrity. In A Short History of Celebrity, Fred Ingalls reminds us that it was Jean-Jacques Rousseau who helped to change the way that men and women thought about themselves and their relationship to one another within society, and in fundamental ways. Ingalls writes, "Rousseau led the way to the thrilling viewpoint that feelings are given by nature, that an individual is almost in possession of his or herself when feeling deeply, that what one feels is best discovered in solitude, and that being true to one's feelings is the surest guide to moral conduct." So we arrive at the romantic cult of individualism. And where is a man most himself and most true to those feelings that should guide his moral conduct? When a man is in love. We have arrived at the age of the romantic hero, and in both senses of that word romantic. It was Byron who told his fellow poet Tom Moore that on the publication of Childe Harold, I quote, "I awoke one morning and found myself famous." And no one better understood how fickle fame can be. To his publisher John Murray, the poet wrote, I quote, "I know the precise worth of popular applause, for few scribblers have had more of it. And if I chose to swerve into their paths, I could retain it, or resume it, or increase it. They made me, without my search, a species of popular idol. They, without reason or judgment, beyond the caprice of their good pleasure, threw down the image from its pedestal. It was not broken with the fall, and they would, it seems, again replace it, but they shall not." When Byron wrote that to Murray, he was in exile in Italy. He had chosen to leave England, his most recent biographer, Fiona McCarthy, suggests, in order to be free from the need to conceal his particular sexual incests, which included sodomy and incest. Byromania, the term coined by his wife Annabella, was becoming something much more complex than simple public adulation, in England at least. Mad, bad, and dangerous to know, as Lady Caroline Lamb said of the poet. His reputation had begun to curdle. This was not a man to welcome to your drawing room unless you had locked up the womenfolk in the attics. And that's the point. Byron not only adds a full measure of charm and glamour to what are thought to be public values, but as Fred Ingalls argues, he also, I quote, turned scandal into an essential dynamo within the engines of publicity. Now, the border between a man's life and his work is not so much lowered as torn down. Byron is Childe Harold and Don Juan. Private feelings are made art for an eager public, keen to measure their own moral worth against the poet's supposedly superior feelings. We are but a step away from Shelley's dictum in A Defence of Poetry that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. In so many ways, Byron seems to foreshadow our present notions of celebrity. Outright individualism, an abundance of charm, an irresistible erotic allure, pursued by scandal and punished with exile. Actual, not simply social. Think, too, of the poet's end. The fatal, if heroic, adventure on behalf of Greek independence and that miserable death at Messalongi. And then remember how celebrities to this day let good causes borrow their fame all the way from Live Aid to Coldplay and the Arctic Monkeys, lending their names to Oxfam, and that regiment of United Nations celebrity humanitarian representatives. Byron, of course, had talent, and the musicians I've mentioned have talent too. But, and this is essential, talent is clearly not a requisite for contemporary celebrity status. The laws pertaining to slander and to libel too forbid me, of course, from naming names, but spend a little time watching Strictly Come Dancing or The X Factor and you'll see my point about talent. In fact, what is often surprising about both these programs is how far we, the audience, seem willing to imagine talent where absolutely none exists amongst the competitors. This and that peculiar British attachment to men and women who willingly embrace failure. What one of my students once called the Captain Scott factor in British life. A passion for losers, and the perverse belief that in losing they are perhaps somehow the real winners. So if talent is not a given in celebrity status, with the single exception perhaps of sportsmen and women, what do you need? Or, to go back to basics, how should we try to define celebrity? We could do no worse than begin with the cultural critic who is generally credited with having produced the modern definition of celebrity, half a century ago. Daniel Boorstin in The Image, A Guide to Pseudo-Events in America. Boorstin was an American cultural pessimist in the style and the tradition of Walter Lippmann and later more overtly political writers like Robert Bork and Alan Bloom. Celebrity, said Boorstin, required neither achievement nor skill. As Jessica Evans has written, I quote, Boorstin assumes that at some point in the past, fame was legendary and noble, a referential yardstick for various virtuous deeds, integrity or honour. It embodied noble and higher values, such as great thoughts and ideals or services for the higher good. For Boorstin, today's celebrities suffer from narcissistic self-obsession. They stand for a culture where instant gratification is preferred over long-term rewards and where surface is valued more than the substance underneath. This last criticism is indeed at the heart of Boorstin's attack on modern culture, which really means, I think, mass culture. It's his contention that the way in which things are presented has become more important than what they really mean, or what they might mean. We live in an age of what he christens the pseudo-event. That is an event which is quite deliberately staged for the media to disseminate to an audience. Again, as Jessica Evans notes, for Boorstin, I quote, celebrity is the quintessential media pseudo-event. Modern mass media celebrity is superficial. No celebrity possesses anything real in a culture devoted to consumption. All celebrities are interchangeable. And so we arrive at Boorstin's celebrated definition of celebrity as, I quote, a person who is known for his well-knownness. And notice that the words that Boorstin chooses are known and well-knownness, and it is, of course, entirely male. His definition is sometimes reworked to read that a celebrity is a person who is famous for being famous. Of course, it's neater and it rolls off the tongue altogether more easily. But the meaning is different. To be well known is not to be famous. One suspects that for Boorstin, to be well known is an opinion that is open to being questioned, while to be famous is a judgment. In 1968, when Andy Warhol observed, I quote, in the future, everyone will be world famous for 15 minutes, judgment, I think, was precisely what Warhol intended. The artist, who had founded a celebrity magazine, Interview, still going strong today, who turned the artist's studio into a factory, and who made his reputation mass painting images of celebrities, Mao, Marilyn, Elvis, Jackie O. The artist had no doubt that fame was the spur, and to have been famous the only epitaph worth having. And when you watch Britain's Got Talent or Big Brother, even the Jeremy Kyle Show or Trisha Goddard on Channel 5, you understand exactly what Warhol meant. Though he might have been surprised at just how ubiquitous ordinary celebrity, to coin a rather useful oxymoron, ordinary celebrity has become. Though you may again wish to ask yourself what exactly is ordinary about it. Tracy's mum Amanda, who was scared that her daughter was about to walk back into the arms of the man who left her for dead as he got released from prison. Or Hazel appearing in the same programme in May 2009, whose toy boy was made to sleep on the floor. Should we be surprised that Hazel wasn't confident about her image? These are the story straplines for at least one of the programmes I mentioned on daytime television, encouraging us in to watch how people begin to manufacture their own celebrity. I'll be returning anyway to this idea of ordinary celebrity in my next lecture. Meanwhile, when we read together Warhol's definition of celebrity and Boorstin's, it seems to me that they are the poles between which all theories about the manufacture, dissemination and consumption of celebrity ought and can and do swing. Boorstin, that's his image, represents the pessimistic view, that our fascination with celebrity is a system of the collapse of traditional cultural values. We happily settle for the superficial because that's what we're given by the media. We are content with the surface and we feel no need to dive deeper. This is perhaps a new version of the traditional conservative lament that everything is going to the dogs. It's also, I think, the anguished cry of the elitist who feels that the clamour of late modern urban popular culture has deafened the world to traditional values such as discrimination, taste, and above all, the hierarchy of excellence. All of which can only be won, hard won, through a rigorous education. In the Boorstin view, the barbarians aren't so much at the gate as there in the front hall and replacing the old masters on the walls with new mistresses, posters of Kylie, of Lady Gaga, of Jordan and Jade. As Boorstin himself observed, I quote, "Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some simply hire public relations officers." Andy Warhol's definition comes to stand for a quite different reading of what celebrity and celebrities mean. Cultural critics have labelled it the optimistic view, the elevation of ordinary people who need possess neither talent nor any ability beyond flourishing in the public eye, are a challenge to the old cultural elitism. At its simplest, the idea here is that anyone can make it. It's about the democratizing of culture. But this popular drive also, and I think quite consciously, threatens the traditional hierarchies of power in society, since in this reading, culture should be understood as an agent of social control. Only a privileged few are permitted to understand it. Admission is by the invitation of education, which is often deliberately specialist. Think of it as a gentleman's club with strict membership rules and an elaborate vetting system for membership. And think of celebrity culture as that other kind of club: music, dancing, chilling out, and then taking the late night bus home. Membership there is determined by little more than the size of the space, the dress code, and perhaps the insolent authority of the bouncer at the door. But be in Brixton, Dalston, or the West End, it's open to all, which is not the case with those august institutions along Pall Mall and St James. As Leo Braudy argues in The Frenzy of Renown, Fame and Its History, I quote, "The longing for old standards of true fame reflect a feeling of loss and nostalgia for a mythical world where communal support for achievement could flourish. But in such societies that did exist, it was always only certain social groups who had an exclusive right to call the tunes of glory, and other visual verbal media were in the hands of a few." And Graham Turner, the Australian cultural critic, having drawn attention to Braudy's argument, suggests that, I quote, "The older patterns of class and privilege have thus lost their power, and in its place is a new media, democracy, where ordinary people have greater access to media representation." Jessica Evans carries this essentially political argument into the economic organisation of Western societies, agreeing with Turner that, I quote, "A number of critics take the view that celebrity culture represents a process of social levelling." She continues, "For them, celebrity culture is the natural endpoint of a long process of democratisation and the development of a capitalist market society." One other thing about Andy Warhol's definition: in the future, everyone will be world famous for 15 minutes. How prescient it is when you remember how capitalist market economies have developed over the past half-century. It's not just famous for 15 minutes, as so many people remember the quotation, but world famous. Warhol foreshadows an essential link between the construction and the consumption of celebrity and the emergence of global culture. I want to return to the consumption of celebrity and celebrities and how it is perhaps democratized popular culture in this age of the internet in my second lecture. But we might remind ourselves that a template for this process is perhaps the most significant achievement of that bundle of overlapping entertainment systems and interests that we label Hollywood, namely the star system. Raymond Dorjnat, who wrote as well as anyone about the cinema in the 1960s and 70s, once observed, I quote, "Through Liz Taylor, Golders Green bears the shock of Freud." It's a line from chapter 12 of Films and Feelings, which remains as pungently provocative as it was in that long-gone age of crushed velvet and patchouli oil. Dorjnat's point, in part, was that film stars mediate what are often problematic psychologies for an audience. In the safety of the dark, alone, and yet together with others, we can confront the other in ourselves there up on the screen. In the film version of Tennessee Williams' play, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Elizabeth Taylor, pictured in my image by Andy Warhol, of course, Elizabeth Taylor, a giant, voluptuous figure, towering above us, filled with the promise of what T.S. Eliot called pneumatic bliss, puts North London's sexual repressions into a certain perspective, particularly in respect of Brick, her sexually ambivalent husband, who is played by Paul Newman. The Freudian word, if you'll allow me to be irreligious, has become flesh. As Richard Dyer, who's written with such authority about stars and stardom, suggests, stars articulate what it is to be a human being in contemporary society. That is, they express the particular notion we hold of the person as the individual. But they articulate both the promise and the difficulty that the notion of the individual presents for all of us who live by it. This is also something that I shall be returning to in greater detail in a month's time, when I hope to look in detail at the lives and deaths of Princess Diana and Jade Goody. Back to Hollywood. Where would Elizabeth Taylor have been, and what perhaps is she still without a system? And it was and is a system in the full meaning of the word, a system dedicated to creating the idea of Elizabeth Taylor, or to turning Archie Leach from Bristol into the American Cary Grant. Some of you may recall Cary Grant's rather rueful observation when his marriage to the heiress Barbara Hutton came to an end. She thought she was marrying Cary Grant, he said. At one level, this is a comment, I think, on the public-private division within the representation of celebrity. But at another, it reminds us that the so-called dream factory also manufactured the men and women who gave us back our dreams. The stars were man and women made, and so are contemporary celebrities. The template that Hollywood designed is, I think, still in operation. Modified, of course, but still wholly recognizable. In the movie version of A Star is Born, that features Judy Garland and James Mason as Vicky Lester and Norman Maine, there's a studio publicist called Libby, played by Jack Carson, whose job it is to keep James Mason's drunken sprees out of the newspapers. Here he is interrupting that most sacred of Hollywood ceremonies, the moment when his wife has been awarded an Oscar, or is about to give an Oscar. Norman is on his way down, and Vicky is on her way up. For the most part, the reptilian Libby succeeds, but he never forgives Maine and Lester for running off and getting married secretly, so depriving him and the studio that he serves of his one big story. Stars may be born, but they're made by publicity, then and now. Think again of glamour, of hello and okay. In High Visibility, the making and marketing of professionals into celebrities, Irving Ryan, Philip Kotler and Martin Stoller suggest that the celebrity industry is supported by 7 what they call sub-industries. There's firstly what they call the entertainment sub-industry. That consists of movie studios, recording studios, theatres, cinemas, sports arenas, and so on. These are the primary production sites where stardom or celebrity is put to work and officially recognises places of consumption of what's been made. I think that I might be tempted to divide this sub-industry into production and consumption, but there is a certain logic in yoking together movie studios and theatres. Both, after all, are specially developed facilities for the production of celebrity. Then comes their second sub-industry, the communications industry. That is, newspapers, magazines, radio, television and film that is closely tied to the third, the publicity industry. Publicists, public relations consultants, advertising agents and market researchers all work intimately with the communications industry to bring their clients into the public eye and as often to keep them out of it. In Britain, Max Clifford is a master of both when it comes to helping his clients to exploit themselves or protect themselves, commercially for the most part. It was Clifford who lent his considerable skills and the Sun newspaper a hand to create one of the most celebrated of their front pages, a story that gave a new meaning, I think, to the phrase midnight munchies. To judge him only by what we can know of his successes, Clifford is also a deft practitioner of the dark art of what we might call celebrity damage limitation. His strategy for defending a madam who was being investigated by the News of the World has become something of a textbook case. Having learnt that a woman who you may remember, called Pamela Bordez, who had allegedly shared her favours with senior journalists and members of Parliament, had worked for the madam, his client, Clifford fed the newspaper Bordez's story, which, mixing politics with journalists, was altogether more attuned to the tastes of the readers of a certain Sunday newspaper. Thus, he managed to take the heat or pressure off his client, the madam. The fourth sub-industry, identified by Ryan Kotler and Stoller, is the representation industry. That is, the agents, the personal managers and promoters who husband their client's celebrity and bring it to the public, acting as their business agents or the middlemen between them and audiences. Then come the image consultants, costume, hair and makeup, as it used to be called in the movie industry. Nowadays, they're more likely to call themselves image consultants, and cosmetic surgeons, as well as cosmeticians, costumiers and hairdressers probably fall into this sub-industry too. Then there is the coaching industry, teaching singing, dancing, modelling and even acting skills. Look no further again than the X Factor or Strictly Come Dancing to see this in action, and working too, sometimes, and failing. On Strictly Come Dancing at the end of last year, Hello Dolly became Goodbye Anne when Miss Widdicombe was finally voted off the show. I quote, Judge Bruno Tonioli told her that she looked like a Dalek in drag and that the dance was more like Hello Trolley than Hello Dolly. While Alicia Dixon said, I think the honeymoon is over. That's all according to Andrew Huff of the Daily Telegraph. And the fact that Miss Widdicombe, having propelled herself into celebrity status on the BBC One programme, was the subject of so many print and broadcast stories, should remind us of that symbiosis. That symbiosis is what characterises all of these sub-industries when it comes to the production of celebrity. Ryan Kotler and Stoller add two further sub-industries to the five that I've been discussing, what they christen the endorsement industry, which is the t-shirt, jeans, toys and games business, and above all, nowadays, it seems, perfume. How else are you going to feel Britain's most famous celebrity exports on your arm, except when you wear them on your skin? Lastly, there are lawyers and accountants, the legal and business services industry, who work out the details of the deals for their clients, manage the money, and advise on how to keep it. As Graham Turner writes in Understanding Celebrity, I quote, we don't need to accept these categories, but they do give us a good overview of the range of cultural intermediaries required to make this system function. However, Turner would also argue that this taxonomy excludes an essential element within the production and consumption of celebrity nowadays. It's what he calls, I quote, the whole edifice of commercial branding. And this advertisement for the Beckham signature cologne is, of course, all about branding and nothing to do with old-fashioned endorsement. David and Victoria Beckham aren't endorsing someone else's cologne, it's theirs and an extension of the Posh and Beck's brand. Always friends and usually lovers. Look at the image. He's tall and masterful above her. For her part, she seems to have her eyes closed in the midst of some kind of melting ecstasy. It's the traditional iconography for men and women in advertising that still underlines the inequality as well as the differences between genders. Men on top, not girls. Active men and passive women who need protecting. Nowadays, it's boy power, not girl power for this particular posh spice. Notice, too, the trademark open-necked white shirt for him and that hint of the sophisticated off-the-shoulder evening gown for her. These two are branded down to the last lash of their eyebrows. Useful as Ryan, Kotler and Stoller's categories are, they do run the risk of all such analysis that they ignore the way in which the categories that they present overlap. I think you could make an argument that celebrity is indeed constructed in the interstices between these sub-industries, at the points where they nudge up against each other. That celebrity is created somehow in the margin, in liminal spaces, and when enabled by these industries, travels on to the cultural centre. Think of punk, and then the respective careers of Sid Vicious and Johnny Rotten. After Rotten became the face and voice, can you believe it, of country life butter, the Times reported on February 2009, quote, Dairy Crest has hailed an 85% rise in its spreadables business on a leap in its butter sales thanks to John Lydon, better known as Johnny Rotten, the lead singer of the Sex Pistols. The idea that celebrity is initially marginal, perhaps even transgressive, is, I think, immensely appealing, but it does fly in the face of most current theories about the production of celebrities, and most importantly, what we might call their commodification. So we arrive at the media, principally television, but print products too, radio, and certainly what are now branded together under that catch-all phrase, new media. Fred Ingalls has written wisely that, I quote, the hinge of our epoch turns with the coming of mass television. The story of celebrity turns with it. He's surely right to see that television has fundamentally changed the way in which we perceive and consume celebrity. Television may be just one part of a number of interlocking activities that operate under the label of media industries. Synergy is, as Rupert Murdoch knows, the name of the game. But it's also, I think, the keystone, cornerstone, the basic building block, choose your own image, in the building of a contemporary celebrity. So that when Graham Turner offers his definition of celebrity in Understanding Celebrity, writing that, I quote, celebrity is a genre of representation. It's a commodity traded by the promotions, publicity and media industries that produces these representations and their effects. It is the television industry, we feel, that plays the vital role in manufacturing celebrity. But, and this is the big question, is it manufacture or mediation? This, I think, is more than a question of semantics, because the two words represent two quite different processes that in terms of economics might be likened to the traditional industrial economy that transforms raw materials into products, and then a post-industrial economy that brokers services rather than goods. A brief comparison between the traditional television chat show and, say, the X Factor will hopefully clarify my point. The rock star is back on the road. The singer has a new song, or the movie star makes a new movie. Then he or she is booked to appear, for the sake of my argument, on the Parkinson show. Although the show itself though not the host, was moved upstairs to the television equivalent of the junk attic 4 years ago, Parkinson stands originally beside an empty line of chairs waiting for his guests, and there's a band somewhere that's half on and half off the stage. We, watching the show, yearn for the empty chairs to be filled. We long to know who the guests are. Parkinson introduces them, and they enter from a space that we never see into, with a musical flourish and the band. So where have they come from? Celebrity land, a place that no camera ever goes. It's where they work and play, where they make movies, they make love, and they probably linger by kidney-shaped swimming pools or raise hell. But we never go there. We know about it, but we never go there. It's a world that is imagined for us in other parts of the mass media wood. And the music that brings them down the stairs or through the curtain, it's there to remind us that they are part of the entertainment industry, that they come from a world that we can never visit, but have been vicariously so often. We can't be part of that in a direct sense. In other words, Tom Cruise, Robbie Williams, Julie Andrews, Billy Connolly, with no less than 15 Parkinson appearances to his credit, or the Beckhams, were booked to show us an identity that has already been made elsewhere. Here, television mediated between us and them. It afforded them what Mrs. Thatcher once called, in a completely different context of course, the oxygen of publicity. Through the medium of television, they lived and breathed for an audience who were allowed to know them briefly and at a level of intimacy that was and is the most delicious illusion of the whole process, what has been called parasocial interaction. It's a moot point, but you can argue that this act of mediation will change things. That television isn't just a window through which we view celebrity, but the process of seeing and being seen subtly modifies the nature of that celebrity. Who perhaps remembers Meg Ryan's standoff with Parkinson when she was booked to promote her new movie, The Cut? Whichever side of the argument you find yourself on, it wasn't the same Meg Ryan who left the show as the woman who'd walked on to talk about the difference between love and romance, or whatever it was that managed to irritate Parkinson so profoundly. I think we can express this idea of mediation in a very simple diagram. There's the celebrity mediated to the audience through the media, a straightforward linear process in which the media are the masters, controlling what reaches the consumer, but also beholden to the celebrity, without whom there would be no event. In this model, then, the media are effectively gatekeepers, controlling what passes through the page or the screen, but dependent on celebrity too, for both access and therefore copy or a television appearance, and as desirable commodities that appeal to audiences and readers, and so increase ratings and circulation. It goes without saying that the rarer the commodity, the greater its value. So, to secure an interview with either of the Toms, Hanks or Cruise, Bruce Willis or Angelina Jolie, adds considerable value to your product. Now, maybe this simple linear model has been radicalized by recent developments in the media, and in particular, the growth of interaction. Ostensibly, the X Factor is a talent competition, with its title suggesting that the purpose of the show is to find winners who have that indefinable X factor, which is a true innate talent. There are preliminary heats, then a first round, and the contestants who get through that are mentored by the judges and groomed for the final round and success with the public. Public success is not, of course, just winning, or indeed winning a prize as well as recognition, and so celebrity status. Winning is about winning a recording contract, winning the #1 position in the charts, and winning a career. It's about exchanging some notion of talent for cash, in other words, commodification. To watch a series of the X Factor is therefore to see the process of celebrification laid bare. And the audience, it seems, want more and more. The Beehive City website reports that the X Factor 2010 became the most successful series for the ITV talent show in its entire history, attracting an average audience of 12.9 million viewers. That's a 48% share of the available television audience across the whole, not just one programme, the whole of Series 7. That was the last series. This represents an increase of 9% from the 11.8 million average 45% share that the 209 Series 6 enjoyed, previously the most watched. And as the results were announced, the show peaked at 19.4 million, 60% of the available audience. The highest peak viewing figure for a non-sports programme on any channel in the UK since 2001, when Only Fools and Horses attracted 20.8 million on Christmas Day for BBC One. What makes The X Factor part of a new generation of television shows, along with its predecessor, Pop Idol, and Strictly Come Dancing, and above all, the daddy of them all, Big Brother, is that the judges are not in the studio, but at home, sitting on so many telephones. 15,448,019 telephone votes were cast during X Factor 2010, the sixth series, with the eventual winner Matt Cardle out in front every week. Figures published after the competition have revealed. As important, I would maintain, were the 12 million unique visitors who, according to ITV, went to the X Factor website during the series, a 14% increase on the previous year, while the official X Factor page on the social networks attracted 2.27 million fans, and the official X Factor Twitter account had 153,000 regular followers. If we reconstruct the relationship between celebrity, media and consumer as a triangle rather than a straight line, then we can see that rather like nuclear fission, once the process has begun, it simply doesn't stop. And as it continues, the successive acts of mediation change the three elements within the relationship. So the theory would be this, that Matt Cardle, say, begins as a good-looking boy from Essex. He's auditioned on television in the first round of the X Factor. The public likes certain things about him, as do the judges at the beginning, and Matt adapts to that before going to the second round, where the judges, led by Cowell, subject him to a more searching scrutiny. He's reapproved by the audience and adapts around what he's heard before the mentoring and during the grooming mediation, if you like, becoming even more exacting, and then the public make their choice. And Matt emerges as a celebrity, a star. In this revised model, the consumer has a direct relationship with the celebrity. This is the interactivity that comes from telephone voting, one element. In fact, I think the process is much more complex, for as well as it's circling the 3 points of the triangle in a continuous notion that grows ever faster, I'd also suggest there are what we might call unilateral as well as trilateral relations involved. So media and celebrity are in constant negotiation about access, but more significantly about revelation and concealment. In essence, this, I think, is what the appeal for privacy is that so many celebrities make. Not to have to reveal themselves when you could argue, of course, that the first principle of contemporary celebrity is precisely revelation, and for the consumer to discover the supposed private self behind the public self. The canny celebrity, or his or her people, drip feeds the media with revelation, while all the while protesting at intrusion and demanding privacy. Then again, as radical left-wing cultural critics have argued, following Adorno and Horkheimer, investing in celebrity can be seen as a hedge against the uncertainties of the entertainment marketplace. Post-Adorno, Marxians have argued that popular entertainment is part of a culture industry that should be analysed in exactly the same manner as any other form of production within a capitalist economy. So, David Desmond Halge reminds us that, I quote, "Celebrity, via the creation and maintenance of stars, serves as a way of formatting and marketing media products, and therefore of reducing or at least controlling the uncertainty that the cultural industry's approach sees as endemic in media production." The media negotiate with consumers, giving them the brands they crave and the revelation that they desire, but never enough. So the consumers up their demands and threaten to shut their purses and wallets and to seek satisfaction elsewhere if these demands are not satisfied. Consumers, as we shall see in my second lecture, have a prescribed number of celebrity narratives. And woe betide the media who fail to follow these storylines, be it rags to riches and now the heartache, or first triumph, then disaster, but after a month in the Priory Clinic, triumph again. Equally, thanks to personal networks and above all a celebrity's websites, there is a direct relationship between the consumer and the object of their desire that bypasses possibly the mediative role of old broadcasting and old print. In Understanding Celebrity, Graham Turner writes, I quote, "The approach that I'm developing deals with celebrity as a media process that is coordinated by an industry and as a commodity or text which is productively consumed by audiences and by fans." I'm not sure that this accounts for the one-to-one interaction that takes place between celebrity, the media industry, and audiences and fans, or takes due note of Leo Braudy's view that the consumers of celebrity, I quote, "are now able to play a part in the production of cultural visibility," even though Turner glosses this passage at the end of his own account. As the theory has it, in a marketplace you always have a choice. And in respect of celebrity, it seems to me that consumers are exercising that choice more and more. I find it difficult to subscribe to a post-structuralist approach like that developed by P.D. Marshall, that celebrities serve, quote, "to control the masses and to channel their emotional energies." On the other hand, when Marshall also writes that celebrities, quote, "act as representative embodiments for the rest of us of what it's like to be an individual," I do find myself in agreement. That is surely why Warhol, rather than Boorstin, is on the better side of the argument. Celebrity can be a form of liberation, which is why so many yearn to be world famous for 15 minutes. How many people would buy into, and I use that phrase quite deliberately, how many people would buy into Boorstin's dictum, I quote, "As individuals and as a nation, we now suffer from social narcissism. The beloved echo of our ancestors, the Virgin America, has been abandoned. We have fallen in love with our own image, with images of our making, which turn out to be images of ourselves." What we have fallen in love with, and with what the consumer finds within the presentation of celebrity, is the subject of my second lecture in 4 weeks' time. A tale of two funerals, Princess Diana and Jade Goody laid to rest. A pair of people's princesses, you may feel. Thank you very much indeed. And I'm delighted to take questions if anyone would like to ask anything. There are microphones around. Why not put your hand up and we'll point the microphone towards you if you'd like to ask anything. Do we have a question? There's one in the front row here.
I was very struck by the David Blaine stunt. He was dangling sort of next to Tower Bridge, and there was a lot of interpretation of why this was arousing so much interest. Voyeurism, I mean, lots of different theories. Have you noticed any kind of new tricks that celebrities are learning in the last 5 years or so?
No, I think one of the interesting things about how to present yourself is that there are only variations on the old tricks. I think. What I think is more interesting is the rapidity with which the particular stunt or trick reaches us. We consume it that much faster. But also, what I would say that goes with it is the kind of rather pleasurable cynicism about why these things are done. And that's something that I haven't quite really thought my way through yet, but I'll need to at some point. Why is it that even though we know that basically we are being possibly fooled by something, that we are happy to be a part of it. Why should that particular stunt have caused us all to be so interested and curious about it, when we knew perfectly well how it had been done? I mean, to put it brutally, what is it about great publicists that allows us to know that we're having the wool pulled over our eyes, but happy to help the wool being pulled over our eyes? That I don't know. But I have no sense in which we're somehow entering in a new age of public presentation. I think everything's always been done before, I think. Anybody else? Well, I'm sorry if I've reduced you all to silence. But can I thank you again very much for coming this evening, and I hope that you will come again and watch Jade Goody and Princess Diana laid to rest in another way. Thank you very much indeed again.